What's up, y'all? It's Alex Eichhoff, and welcome to the Fart Podcast. Eichhoff Art. Can't say it without saying fart. This is like the first episode, basically sharing with you what I can about my journey of becoming a full-time artist. I've been full-time for about 4 years now, so I quit my full-time job back in 2019. And this first episode is kind of a little bit of a recap of that process of going from full-time work to my now full-time self-employment of being an artist. So let's rewind. June 1st, 2019, I quit my full-time job. I was working for a company called Dimensional Innovations in Kansas City, Kansas. I was there for about 4 years. Now, when I was working for DI, as we called it, I learned a lot. I gained a ton of experience working with different building materials. DI was basically a giant fabrication company. They're basically like a sign company on steroids. And that's not even really giving it justice. They do a ton of stuff. It's anything from interactive displays to fabricating entire settings in an environment. They do a lot of movie theater decor, like a whole architectural decor and interior design scope. They do a lot of professional sports stadiums, colleges, all kinds of stuff. I mean, they're 3D printing now. If you watch football, the Las Vegas Raiders stadium, their new stadium, they have a giant torch. DI built that. They were actually printing that whenever I left. So anyway, it was a cool job, especially for somebody who just got out of college, earning an art degree. And I was always told you can't make money as an artist, which is also a myth in my mind. I'll talk about that in a future podcast. When I was working for DI, I actually felt like I was getting paid to be an artist. For the longest time, I was working in the sculpture department, making all kinds of 3D work, creating all kinds of faux scenery and larger-than-life sculptures. It was pretty neat. I felt somewhat fulfilled in my creative spirit, but not enough. I also got a pretty good grasp of process in bigger projects while I was working at DI. I even got to travel around the country and the Caribbean on company dime. And if you're still not convinced that it was a neat job, they even had a keg in their lobby for clients mostly, but they didn't mind when we stayed after work and had a couple rounds just shooting the shit. And that was a really nice highlight of working there, not gonna lie. There were certainly a lot of perks of being an employee, but that was the thing. I was still an employee. And I've learned a lot about creative minds, and it's kind of hard to be an employee as a creative. Maybe you feel the same way. I was never somebody to behave and keep my mouth shut in school. I had a lot of issues with that. I was kicked out of a lot of classrooms. So it was clear that I had somewhat of a divergent mind, and that kind of just makes it hard to do something for the sake of doing it, which is common in the employee mindset. Somebody tells you to do something and you're just supposed to follow that instruction, but that's hard for me when there's no meaning behind any activity that I'm supposed to be doing. That makes it hard to be a part of any big system. So despite all of the positives for working for DI, at the end of the day, I was still working for DI, working for someone else. On top of that, I was paid hourly, which honestly isn't that bad for somebody who's hardworking like me. The harder you work, essentially the more you make, especially with overtime. But there's still a ceiling to that. And there's something about working harder and more efficiently than your coworkers who maybe get paid about the same as you. It becomes a little degrading, and there's not a whole lot of incentive to push yourself and to work really hard. And that wears on you over time. And on top of this, it was a very physically demanding job. It was manual labor, after all, despite how creative it might have been at times. And I'm not dogging manual labor by any means. I have a lot of respect for blue-collar work. In many regards, being a professional muralist is more laborious than a lot of work that I did at DI. The difference there is I'm carrying out my own vision and creating something that is unique and original to me. There's a lot to say about the meaning that can provide your life and your work, and you can stay motivated and you get a lot of energy that replaces the energy that it costs. So anyway, while I was working as an employee, I started to see the writing on the wall. I I was hearing some of the price tags on the projects that I was working on, especially in the sculpture department, and I started to do some basic math. I was realizing the difference between being a wage earner, trading my time for money, and being a profit earner when you own your own business. Essentially, the more efficiently you could work, the higher the profit you would yield. That's different than being a wage earner and you still have to work 40 hours a week regardless of the project, and if you get it done early, you still had to clock in the next day and you got paid the same amount regardless of how hard you worked in comparison to anybody else. One project in particular that really cemented solopreneurship in my head was a sculpture project that I was able to work on for Temple University in Philadelphia. My boss essentially gave me reins on this project and I ended up doing about 80% of the fabrication by myself. Now I'm not sure if this number is accurate, but I remember hearing a number like $54,000 for this one sculpture. This project took me about 2 months to sculpt, paint, and install it. Obviously, there were thousands of dollars in expenses, but even if it cost half as much as the price tag, that's still 27 grand. I maybe made $7,000 in wages over that 8-week period, and I didn't like that differential. So I started to develop an exit strategy. I decided I would quit my job and create a business around my art. And now here we've gotten to the point where I actually think that I could help you if you're somebody who wants to pursue their passions and create a business around your hobby or your creative talents and efforts. So hopefully this is inspiring for you. You too could quit your job that you don't like and pursue your passions. One of the most important points that I want to make today is the mindset behind this transition. So after I decided to quit my job, I stayed with DI for 6 more months. Even though I was burnt out from the physical demands and the stress that I incurred from working for this company, I took on more stress by diving deeper into the belly of the beast. I transferred to the install department. This meant a lot more overtime. Most weeks were spent on the road, traveling away from my friends, missing out on family gatherings just for the sake of working like a dog. And let me tell you, install work was the most stressful because it's kind of the end phase of the entire process of any given fabrication project. So if there were any issues or mistakes made anywhere along the line, whether it was in engineering, design, project management, fabrication, shipping, it all came to a point on the install. And we were stuck on site in front of the client trying to deal with the fuck ups in real time. And that was really stressful for me. It's hard enough to make your own mistakes and own up to them, but when it's somebody else's mistake and you're the one that's suffering and paying for it, that is super degrading and just really crushes any sort of incentive or motivation to work hard. It kind of just makes you not care if you fuck up. I don't know. It's hard to explain. Anyway, it brought me a massive amount of stress, which I'm sure is still buried deep in my body 4 years later. But I used the pain as motivation. Anytime I felt stressed, I would internalize it and use it as fuel to stick to my goal to get out and carve my own path. I started to save money like a fiend. I was a frugal freak. I was often stuffing my face at the hotel breakfast and even taking hard-boiled eggs and fruit and yogurt with me to the job site for my lunch so I didn't have to spend my per diem that was allotted every day for food, and I was able to pocket that cash. And because I was working so much overtime, I was really making more money than I ever had, and I was just saving as much of it as I possibly could. My strategy here was to build myself a financial runway. And if you're familiar with financial freedom or the FIRE movement, this is not a new concept for you. But actually at the time, I wasn't even familiar with retiring early or financial independence. I just kind of intuitively figured that if I saved enough money to survive off of for a year, that is to have enough money in my bank to pay a year's worth of expenses, then I wouldn't need to work. I wouldn't need the income. And this is just as simple as tracking my expenses expenses, understanding how much money I needed to survive and live off of comfortably. And then I just had to save that amount. Whatever 12 months worth of expenses was, that's how much time I had to live without an income. I started telling people my idea of wanting to maybe quit my job, except I was wording it more like a sabbatical. I would tell people that I was going on sabbatical for a year to work on my art. That seemed a little bit less crazy in my mind to tell people, but in reality, I actually had enough money to survive for closer to 2 years. I just kind of wanted to downplay it to my community. I don't know. I didn't want people to think I was taking such a dramatic leap. If you ever listen to art podcasts or any solopreneur or entrepreneur content, people always advise kind of slowly transitioning to start your side hustle on the side of your full-time job, so you have that security and you can slowly transition into becoming a full-time creative artist once you have the ball rolling. And that's not what I did. I took the leap. Having said that, I still did a ton of preparation before I quit my job, before I actually left. That's why I waited 6 months, not only to save up money, but also to prepare my mind. I did a lot of mental work, a lot of reframing my perspective. I became a bookworm. I was doing a lot of driving on the job whenever I was traveling to installs. So anytime I was driving a 26-foot box truck across the country, I was listening to podcasts, business podcasts, art podcasts, finance podcasts, audiobooks, and I was waking up early before work in the hotel just to read more inspirational and educational books. I was really kind of reframing my mind to get out of the employee mindset and to start thinking like a business owner. I also applied for my LLC a couple months before I left my job. And with whatever energy I had left after work, maybe I did a little bit of creating. But this is the thing, and this is one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to quit my job, not only because I wasn't really feeling 100% fulfilled in my work, but also I was not giving myself time to create outside of work. It was really the last thing I wanted to do after a long day of physical work was come home and stand on my cold concrete basement floor just to paint. I was just drained. I didn't really do much. I mostly opted for the beer and smoking weed, and I just wanted to veg after work. I had basically zero creative process embedded into my lifestyle. I felt like my art practice was dying and my skills were atrophying with it. I was just never able to balance the creative practice with a full-time job. I just had a lot of excuses, a lot of resistance to creating. I knew I was supposed to do it deep down. Anytime I asked my spirit and my soul what I should be doing with my time, I knew I really should be creating. I knew all along that that is what my calling was, but I just couldn't do it. I didn't have the energy. I don't know. Maybe you relate to this. If you do, hopefully this helps. Hopefully this podcast can help somewhere along the way. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff on here. But regardless of my shortcomings and my ability to maintain this balance or have any balance whatsoever, any sort of creative practice, I was still aware of this fact that I wasn't able to do both. So I knew that there was only one way to save my artist self from dying, and that was to take the leap. I had to buy myself time. There's a cliche that time is money. To an extent, I kind of think that's bullshit, because time is only money when you use your time productively. However, at least theoretically, money actually can buy you time. Not like extend your life, but I mean, just like I was explaining earlier with my financial runway, if you have enough money to pay the bills for a month in your bank account, then theoretically, you don't have to work and earn income for a month. You have the money to pay the bills. You don't have to work, which means that you have the free time to do whatever you want. You can pursue your passions. I knew this. I think people too readily accept just being a part of the rat race and living a conventional life as we're told to do, really as our educational system here in the United States prepares us to do. But I'm going to challenge you with this podcast to live an alternative lifestyle because I have found great relief in pursuing this. And believe me, being on top of your finances is probably the most important aspect of this. It's not really sexy to talk about business and finances as an artist. You just want to create and be free. But I'm telling you, one of the most essential parts of this is being on top of your finances. Discipline is freedom. You can't have the free time unless you have all of this logistical side in order. I'm sorry, that's just how I believe. If you think differently, leave a comment. I don't know. Now, it's only fair to let you know that I came from somewhat of a privileged starting point. I graduated college, zero debt. Partly because I went to an affordable in-state school. Shout out Truman State University. Go Dogs! Partly because I got scholarships. I played the game in high school. But honestly, most of starting from ground zero is due to the fact that my parents paid for my school. Now, don't get it twisted. I'm not some rich trust fund kid. That came with sacrifices. I'm pretty sure we went on one family vacation in my entire childhood, and we were known as the frugal family, which was a little bit embarrassing at times. I always got everything I needed as a kid. We were secure, but I grew up thinking we were poor. My parents were often stressed and arguing about finances. So my financial situation didn't come without caveats. Both of my parents were busting their ass. My mom always has multiple jobs. My dad was working super long hours when I was a kid, and most of their ability to afford my education was because my dad started a mutual fund whenever I was born. He took advantage of investments and was really smart and planned ahead. So kudos to my parents. Thank you. They were also super supportive. Even when I decided to go to study art in college, they were always really supportive. They were like, yeah, that makes sense. That's what you do. So I did have a pretty privileged starting point compared to a lot of artists. But don't let my advantage become an excuse for you. It's not impossible for you just because I started with a higher saving power. Maybe things just look a little bit different for you. Your journey is going to be slightly different from what mine was. Maybe it takes you longer than 6 months to save that cash pile, your capital, if you will, for starting your business. Maybe it takes you a year. Maybe you can make more money than me. I was only making $18 an hour at my peak at DI. I started out at 15, so I really had to be frugal. And maybe you can even be more frugal than I was. After all, I was still buying booze and weed at that time. You could be a little bit more frugal than that. Buying no wine is better than buying boxed wine, albeit that was my cheap alternative. All I'm saying is just because I had a slight advantage doesn't mean you can't find your own unique path. You just gotta find your advantage too. And even if you feel like you're at rock bottom and there's just no way out, I promise you, if you get creative and if you want it bad enough, especially if you are experiencing a lot of pain and you really hate your job and you really feel like you are down on your luck, use that as motivation. Anyway, back to the quitting my job. So I was still working at DI all this time. I was diving deeper into it, picking up overtime, working my butt off because I was just really motivated to do it, like I said. And I actually put in my 6-week notice. It's customary to put in 2 weeks notice. I put in 6 weeks, so there was no bridges burned. In fact, my work became way more enjoyable after that. All my coworkers began to show me a lot more respect, and I became more interesting to a lot of people. In fact, the vice president of the company even approached me on my last day and said, I think you're making a really smart move. And that's impactful. That's really inspiring. It was really motivating. It kept me juiced to do what I was doing, and it helped me feel like I was aligned with my bigger purpose. So there's something to be said about putting your intentions out into the universe and just kind of talking about your goals with your community. It starts the conversations that are supposed to be had, kind of solidifies your dreams into your reality. Now, that doesn't mean that you can just talk the talk. You still gotta walk the walk. You gotta put your words to action and actually do the work. Quitting your job is not about retiring or stopping work. I promise you, I have worked way harder since quitting my full-time job and becoming an artist. I was working maybe 60 hours a week on average. Now I'm working 100. Not like actual productive art making, but like my brain just never stops. It's hard to sleep, especially that first year. I lost a lot of sleep and took on even more stress than what I was experiencing when I was at DI, even on the worst days. But it was worth it because I was living my purpose. I was living a more meaningful life, and every ounce of energy that I put into my work as an artist, I felt like I was building something. I felt like I was working towards something greater, a higher ceiling. I knew deep down that I could be earning more as an artist. We'll get to that later too. But there's something profound about pursuing a life of meaning. If you haven't read Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning, do it. It's a good thing to put things in perspective for you. If you're somebody that is just not content, I recommend it. You gotta walk the walk though. And let me tell you, even though I felt like a boss after I stopped being an employee, I started out not walking, but crawling. More on that later. We've got a lot to talk about in this podcast. But that about wraps it up for this episode. I hope my story has been inspiring for you and even lit a fire under your ass so that you will start to pursue your passions. Life is what you make it. I believe that. You can change your situation. You don't have to be stuck in a job that you don't like. I know it might feel like it at times, but you don't. What you do have to do is work. Use the discomfort in your current situation as motivation and fuel to build a better future for yourself. You can do it, and I am here to hopefully give you some inspiration and some tips on how to start. So thanks for listening, and I hope you tune in next time.